Welcome to Accessible, the podcast that opens the door to disability leaders and their ideas. I'm George Gatto.
And I'm Amelia Reigard.
We are doing something a little different in this special series called Voices of the Network. Over the next few episodes, we will highlight university centers on disability, which are currently facing funding uncertainty in the proposed 2026 federal budget.
We'll explore how these programs came to be, their bipartisan roots in the Developmental Disabilities and Bill of Rights Act, and the impact they have on people with disabilities, families, and communities across the country.
Through conversations with national and local leaders, trainee alumni, and professionals, we'll shed light on the real-world value of USEDS, LENS, and other DD network programs. These are stories of leadership, innovation, and impact.
All right, y'all, this is the season finale of our Voices of the Network series. Over the past several months, y'all have been following along as we've been lifting up stories of impact from across the DD network as our programs face an unprecedented funding threat at the federal level. In this episode, we're closing out the season with a national perspective. We sit down with the lovely Lillie Heigl, Director of Policy at the Association of University Centers on Disability, or AUCD, to really just get a legislative update and really reflect on what this year has meant for disability policy. Lillie shares her journey into this work, what the policy landscape looks like right now, and how AUCD has been mobilizing to protect programs that serve people with disabilities nationwide. We talk about relationship building, storytelling, and why advocacy is a long game. I also want to take a moment to thank all of our guests that have contributed to this amazing series, and all of you. Thank you for engaging with us and sharing with your friends. It really means a lot. So, thank you. Okay, here's the show.
All right. Well, we are very excited today because we have a Missourian on who lives in D.C. right now, but is representing our state well, visiting us. And so, Lillie, we are so excited to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. My name is Lillie Heigl. I'm the Director of Policy at AUCD, or the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. I am originally a Hoosier. I grew up in outside of Indianapolis, Indiana, but I did go to undergrad at the University of Missouri, and still consider myself loyal to the Missouri Tigers, and felt really good about a win that we had over the weekend. Sorry to our Kansas Network friends.
That's my alma mater.
So. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not at all.
I don't have a dog in this fight, so go everyone.
Yeah, there you go. Fun to have the border war back. But went to the University of Missouri. I studied journalism there. I felt really passionate about storytelling and the power that storytelling has to advance social issues and move society along. And then towards the end of undergrad, I became a little bit more interested in policy by way of an internship at a disability organization in Europe. And I was really interested in the work the policy officers were doing. I said to them, how do I get a job like yours in 10 years? And they had all gone to grad school or had law degrees or some assortment of advanced degrees. And so that's what I went and did. And post-grad ended up working my way down to DC, which was always the goal. I've been interested in federal disability policy since I was in grad school, and ended up at AUCD doing this work.
Well, that's awesome. So, Lillie, you may not, I'm sure we must have mentioned this at some point, but, this is a partnership with our LEND, our Missouri LEND, which is at the Thompson Center at Mizzou. And so one of our primary audiences are those LEND students, and we have a new bunch of LEND trainees coming in right now. Can you just talk for them a little bit about what AUCD is, just in case they don't know?
Yeah, absolutely. AUCD is the national membership organization for the 68 USEDs, the 60 LENs, and the IDDRCs. We provide technical assistance. That's not my arena, but we provide technical assistance to our network members. We do policy work and advocacy on behalf of our network members as it relates to disability policy issues broadly, and also specific to appropriations and funding issues, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a little bit. But all of that comes down to the shared goal that I think AUCD and our network members have, which is striving to promote quality of life, health, and well-being for people with disabilities. And that's really the true north for what we do, is to be that bridge between the work that our wonderful network members are doing and the national landscape.
Yeah. Lillie, I wonder if you alluded to some of the policy work around appropriations, and I know we're going to get there, but just the last 8 months, I guess, like what has it been like? What have the challenges been being in the policy director, being in the policy office at AUCD during this time with all these shifts in federal priorities and navigating that? What's it been like? If you could give us like a snapshot.
I think there's a running joke that all of us have about how we're living in unprecedented times. And it's both a joke, but it's also really true that a lot of the threats or the happenings at the federal level, both in Congress, from the administration, they're not things that we've seen before. When you look at the history of disability rights and a lot of the disability legislation, there's been really strong partnership and bipartisanship on our issues. You see that in the DD Act, you see that for the ADA. And it's not to say that by any stretch of the imagination that bipartisanship is gone, but it is that we've had this really rich partnership for a long time, and that's simply not the landscape that we're living in. We're seeing day by day cuts to funding for vital programs that we care about, things in the special education space, things that impact people with disabilities but aren't called disability programs. When you talk about medical research out of NIH, or vaccines and the vaccines and autism conversation, but the fact that a lot of people with disabilities are perhaps immunocompromised or more susceptible and need access to these things. So there's just been a really wide onslaught of threats and harms coming down from different avenues, that it makes it difficult to focus on a thing and to try to push on a thing. And in fact, it's not our job. We have to push on multiple things at once. But that's the unprecedented really holds true.
Yeah. So Lillie, like many USED directors and LIN directors, I imagine, I went to DC to meet with our senators and Congress people and or their staffs, and which was it's not something I've done, spend any time doing, but I was really in some ways heartened at how accessible our legislators are. And I wonder, like, what is your relationship with a given office? Do you spend time up, say, in the Senate building, or what does that look like for you?
Absolutely. So before I was at AUCD, I was working for Senate Help. So a lot of my relationships on the Hill, at least probably more Senate side, predate coming to AUCD. And I took the time to have coffees with folks and get to know them and get to know their offices and what their boss's priorities are. And that relationship building it was an important support for me while I was there, but it was also a strategic investment in wherever I was going to go next, which ended up being AUCD, which is that relationships are so important to the policy work. Not necessarily even in the gross who you know way, but it's that staffers and offices are doing so many different things, and have really wide portfolios, and there's lots of bills and lots of things happening. And so being one of the things on their radar, that's a hard thing to maintain, and it takes work to maintain. So we at AUCD did a lot of behind the scenes work when I first got started to prepare ourselves to be more active on the Hill, whether that was updating materials, collecting data, collecting stories, so that when we took to the Hill June and July ahead of the accelerated or the appropriations process that was getting started at that point, they had kicked the can until after reconciliation had finished. We wanted to go to the Hill as prepared as possible to tell the story of the network and to tell the story of their state. So I was on the Hill an hour and a half ago, and go if we have network members in town, I join them. It ebbs and flows depending on if there's recess or not, of how often I'm there, how often my team is there. But it's long-term investment relationship building and not just a popping up when you need something.
That's we're really lucky to have you, I think, as a network, and to have that level of advocacy and engagement on the Hill. Talking about some of those things a little bit, because our audience may or may not be aware of some of the things that you're alluding to, like appropriations and the reconciliation bill. And to be honest, with all of the things happening federally, I'm getting a crash course and feel like I'm back at Schoolhouse Rock and like trying to remember how a bill is passed and like what are all the steps, right, to those things. And so the impetus for this, and George alluded to it earlier, this series, Voices of the Network, was because there was that threat to, University Research Center funding, and then kind of thinking through, well, what can we do, our small part here in Missouri, to raise some awareness and do some education about like what's the value of a USED, right? What is it that we're doing in our communities and our states for and on behalf of people with disabilities? And so I wonder if you talk a little bit about where we're at in the process of just, we know that there's been talk of eliminating the funding, USED funding, but that the House and the Senate have to pass their appropriations bill, which then really decides where the funding goes. And will you talk a little bit about that for our listeners who maybe don't understand that process?
Every year ahead of the annual appropriations process, which is how Congress funds the government, the president and the administration provide a president's budget. It is a roadmap for the administration's priorities to say, hey, Congress, we know you have the power of the purse, but this is how we would like to see money allocated based on our priorities, what we think should be funded, where things should move, et cetera. It's not binding. It's, again, just that roadmap. So in, I think, end of May, or maybe it was a little earlier May, we saw a draft pass back of the president's budget, which was a leak of the version between Secretary Kennedy and President Trump that gave us an indication that there were going to be really large cuts. Before that, we didn't feel safe and we were concerned about it. But that pass back really showed us, okay, there's going to be a looming threat. By the end of the month or early June, I'm not remembering exact dates anymore, the full president's budget came out. And what we saw was a lot of different programs eliminated, fewer than were in that passback, which was really important to note because there was very big outcry after that passback and people were upset and they were loud. And so the fact that fewer things were eliminated or fewer things had funding cuts, it did show that that push, it matters. So when the president's budget came out and the accompanying congressional justifications that give you more detail than just that top line president's budget document, we saw that the USEDS and 4 or 5 other distinct disability programs, the Paralysis Resource Center, Limb Loss Resource Center, projects of national significance, they were named as being eliminated, and their funding was going to be kind of subsumed under independent living. There were a lot of questions about, well, how would this work? And we have different authorizing statutes. And there was a lot of hubbub around that, understandably, because that's not how our laws work. So from there, AUCD, in partnership with our network, worked really hard between the release of that president's budget and the appropriations work that Congress was doing we worked really hard to educate members of Congress on why we exist the way we do, why we have this structure, the separation of the DD Act, and why that's so important, the three-legged stool between us, the DD councils, and the protection and advocacy agencies, the strength of our network, the fact that there was this kind of block granting situation is part of that rhetoric of sending autonomy back to the states. And well, if you block grant it, then the state can decide how this money is spent. And so a lot of our education also focused on what you're doing or saying you want to do maybe sounds more efficient, but in actuality, here's how your USED is already meeting state needs and how they work with state agencies or your governor's office and how they already do that. And block granting doesn't you're not fixing something. It's already baked in. So we did a lot of that. At the end of July, the Senate did their appropriations. We call it a markup. It's the process through which a bill gets voted on in a committee and voted out of committee. And members can do different work with adding amendments and all kinds of things. The Senate product, we had heard ahead of time, was really bipartisan. There was a strong effort from the chairwoman and the ranking member to really work across the aisle on a product that would successfully pass the Senate, because the Senate does have that 60 vote majority that you need. So you do see more bipartisan work have to happen in the Senate because of that threshold, whereas the House, you just need that simple majority. So we saw a really great product come out of the Senate. It kept the USEDs separate with their own autonomy. We call it flat funding, which was just level funding, same funding from 2025. We were really happy about that. And then we waited to see what the House would do. And we shifted a lot of our advocacy to focus on the House. And we anticipated that because the House just needs that simple majority, it was likely that the House was going to have a product that was much more partisan and therefore could align more closely with the president's budget. So again, that really impacted how we thought of the advocacy work we were doing and messaging our work to members. The subcommittee marked up a bill last week. We got to see bill language last week. The bill language stays pretty high level. So at the agency level, you can't tell what's going to happen to specific programs like USEDs. We had to wait until this Monday to see what we call report language, which is that more detailed level fleshing out of how individual programs get funded. And the House product ended up being pretty positive as far as we're concerned for our programs. We were again level funded. There was an acknowledgement that ACL needs to exist as an agency the way it does, unless authorizing members from authorizing committees were to take action. But it was an acknowledgement from the Appropriations Committee that it is not within their power to move agencies around and move programs to different agencies without the work of authorizers. There were still some harmful things in the House product, not as it relates to us specifically, but other things that impact people with disabilities. There were. So between the two, the product that we like better is the Senate's product that was more bipartisan. But overall, I think what we've seen from both the House and the Senate really does show the impact of our network and the work from the broader disability community, that the cuts that were a very real threat back in the early summer, folks were upset about them. And there was a lot of pushback that happened in the meantime months.
Do you have any, I guess, stories or either meeting with legislators or their staffs, or how you worked with, you said inland personnel, or just any stories that stand out to you about how this summer went, or what sort of led us to this, for at least for me, it moved from feeling pretty down about everything to, having some hope now.
I don't know if there's a single story that stands out specifically, but I think that's actually reflective of the nature of this work, that it is continuous and it's a steady drumbeat. And you go and you say the things and you do your research, and you make the connection, and then you send your thank you, and then you pop back up a few months later and send them resources. And so there's not a one-off where I can recall meeting with a staffer and leaving and saying, wow, I really changed their mind. But this is a continuous effort to ensure that whoever I'm meeting with knows who our network is. And I might have to remind them in 6 months and do my spiel all over again. But I think it's a slow and steady drumbeat, which makes telling you a specific story challenging.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
Thank you, Lillie, for that overview of the process. I think that was really helpful. And so by the time this episode is released, we probably will know maybe where this budget stands. But just correct me if I'm wrong, that the House and the Senate have to come to their conclusion right by the end of September. And so that we'll sort of know how this all shakes out by then either way, unless they can't come to some agreement, and then there will be some next steps.
Yeah, so there's a couple paths forward. There is a deadline of September 30th to fund the government. Our funding is under the bill that we call LHHS, Labor, Health, and Human Services, and then in parentheses, into education and other related agencies. It is the largest domestic spending bill. It is very unlikely that they are able to pass that bill or any probably very few, if any, of the other 11 funding bills, because it's a super short timeline. The House and Senate would have to both vote on these bills on the floor. And right now they're both out of committee, but they haven't been voted on the full floor. So you have to go to that step, and then you have to conference or work between the House and the Senate to have a product that can pass in both chambers, because right now the versions are different. So they would have to kind of reconcile those, create a new version that could pass in both chambers. It's a super short timeline when you're talking about 20 days to do all of that. So what will happen is one of a few possibilities. The government could shut down after September 30th if funding bills haven't been passed. The alternative is what's called a continuing resolution, which is a temporary funding bill that more or less kicks the can down the road. And you pass a CR for a limited amount of time to say, we are going to keep funding the government at X level while we continue to work on these larger bills. So what we could see, and you will probably start to see in the news, especially as this episode comes out, is talk about a CR and how long the CR is for. It seems that Congress is interested in a shorter term CR, something that funds the government until November. What we're seeing is that the administration is wanting a CR that lasts until January 31st, and Congress seems pretty opposed to that. So we will see that. There's also going to be discourse about what's in the CR. And if you see things about a clean CR, that means keeping everything just at level from where it was in the previous fiscal year, which for us would have been the last continuing resolution in March. But there are always some anomalies. And so if something expires or there's something coming up, there may be some anomalies that get negotiated on. So it's not a true clean CR. But you could also see a world in which the Democrats in the minority, if they feel like whatever product is happening either isn't bipartisan, or if there continue to be threats from the administration for rescissions and rescission packages that take back funding that was passed on a bipartisan basis by Congress, there might be a push from Democrats to not play ball and to put us into shutdown, absent some agreement about the bipartisan nature of the work. So there's a couple different paths forward. In all likelihood, shutdown aside, we won't see our funding bill passed before the end of the month. Our funding would come through in a continuing resolution, or that CR. And the questions are, how long is it for? What guardrails are there on a CR so that the administration can't move money around? That was an issue with the FY25 March continuing resolution. Our network didn't experience that, but many of our aging and disability partners did. That money that they should have had in that last couple months of FY25, it was not coming down the way it should have been. So there's also just concerns on what are the guardrails to ensure that what Congress appropriates in a continuing resolution actually goes out.
Yeah.
What, if anything, like can be done at this point? You talked a lot about how, there's people sharing their stories, right? All of the advocacy work that has happened across the network and from partners being effective. Is there anything to be done right now?
We're in kind of a funny spot. I think where we are is, so theoretically, because the House and the Senate agreed on that level funding, when we do get to the stage after a CR that Congress takes back up those larger funding bills, what they're really negotiating out, and this is logical, is the differences. So since our number is the same between both chambers, we're hopefully a non-issue. We're off the radar. They've agreed, both the House and the Senate, that leave us alone. And that's the same for, a lot of our disability and aging partners. But I think the place we're in is that there still are potential threats and issues, like what I was mentioning about a CR and what if money doesn't come down. It could be an issue around, there have been so many staff layoffs and rifts at agencies that even if money goes to an agency, who's there to make sure the grants go out the door? So I think where we are is that, back to what I was saying about relationship building, it still stays that important, because what we're doing now is ensuring that you have the relationship with your staffers and with your office, so that if there's a problem, someone knows who you are and they're willing to vouch for you, to pop their head above the parapet, whatever it is. And so it's that ongoing relationship building work that you don't have an ask right now. That's a kind of nice place to be in, because you can send information that says, hey, we just had this new cohort start of LEN trainees. This is a little bit about them. They come from all these places in the state, or all of these different specialties. And hey, Senator so-and-so's office, we just want you to know. We just wanted to share this good news with you. Look at this cohort. Isn't this amazing? And that's where we are. It's that the continued relationship building, and now is a good time to still do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that, personally, as a researcher, I never really thought much about this. I've realized, it's been a good lesson for me to realize how important that relationship building is. Any advice for people like me about what types of information or what types of things should we share? I don't want to just send stuff to send stuff, but I would like to send something to our legislators that's valuable to them and helps them to make, educated decisions about what to fund and not, or mostly what to fund.
Yeah, I think it really depends, obviously, on your state, and also the member you're sending things to specifically. I wouldn't send the same thing to the office of, say, Senator Sanders that I would to Senator Hawley. I might be sharing something about our network to each, but how I talk about it is going to look very different. So even across the same state, a congressperson from St. Louis, you may have something very different than what you're sending for a much more rural district. So when sending things, I would think about what is the member in that district interested in? What are they going to care about? If there's someone who's been really loud on a specific policy area and you happen to have a project or some research coming out or a paper or something that's related to something you know they've worked on, there's a really natural fit there for something you can share. Always anything that is specific to their district. So if you have trainees that are from their specific district, relevant to the House, not, a senator, that's something that is worth sharing because they always care about something that is specific to their district. And then there's some general things that you could always share if you have large end of year annual reports that you do. That's the kind of thing that you can share and say, hey, we just put this out. It's a great summary of what we've been up to. Sending it your way. Please let us know if you have any questions. Would love to talk about it further. That sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Great advice. One of the things I've noticed is that, we've been asked to share stories about what's happening in our, in our state or, through our USEDs and LENS. And I'm just curious, how does AUCD then leverage those stories, or how do you use those stories from, the various states?
I review them before I'm going to meet with an office so that I have a sense of what's been going on in that state and what stories there are, so that if there's an opportunity in the conversation to share a specific story that I know from our network, then I have that. I think some of the story collection we've also been doing is a little bit defensive in nature, that is preparing for potential harms, that we want to hear stories about Medicaid so that when cuts are happening in 2026 and people are impacted, we have been collecting stories along the way to be able to share.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Lillie, I'm going to go off script for a second, and I guess it's not really off script, but off maybe some of the topics we had previously said we might cover, because you had mentioned, there are some other issues in the markups that have, or in the appropriations committees. Yes, I'm going to get it. That have come out that even though, USEDs maybe have retained or retaining their funding, that there are other policies that you guys are keeping your eye on that will impact people with disabilities. And I wonder if you could give us just a brief mention of what some of those things are that AUCD is keeping their eye on.
Yeah, so not from the markup specifically, although the markup, one of the substantial cuts was related to education funding and ESEA. And so even though the dominant funding source for special education would be IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, if schools are impacted by those general funding cuts and students are they're in the public education system, they will feel that. So it's not a disability program, but those cuts still impact the disability community. Other things that aren't our network specific, but we're watching a lot of what's happening in the autism space, and there's a lot of fear from family members and from autistic people themselves about back when there was the registry announcement, and what is that going to mean for my personal data, and am I at risk? And so even though that's not like our jurisdiction as an organization, LEND is through Autism Cares, and it directly impacts and serves people with autism. So yes, we absolutely track it and we care about it. And we worked with a group of other national organizations to do a roundtable about autism and what the community needs for supports at this time and what we'd like to see. So that's something we track. We track things in the education space and special education. Recently, there were grants canceled under IDEA Part D, and we have network members that receive those grants. And even if our network members didn't receive those grants serve people with disabilities. And so that matters to us. We have engaged on the issue of subminimum wage. The administration rescinded the rulemaking that would have phased out and eliminated subminimum wages. That's something we care about. There's been some attacks on a couple of other federal rulemaking areas, whether that's like Section 503 that deals with federal contracting, and the federal government has an aspirational goal of 7%, that the federal government should hire 7% of its workforce in contracting should be people with disabilities. The administration has rescinded that on the basis of affirmative action and DEIA. That is something we're engaging on and saying, look, as a network, we think that disability employment is really important, and our centers support disability employment, and we think that Section 503 and this aspirational goal are important. So we work on a lot of different things as they pop up.
So really great things for people to be aware of and keep our eyes on, and where else people can put their education or their advocacy efforts as all of these things are being determined. So thanks for taking some time to point those out. I'll take some time to point out, I don't know if our listeners will be able to hear it, but you have a cat, Lillie, who's begging for your attention in the background.
I have 2 cats that are shut outside of where I'm recording. I am so sorry if they are coming.
No, don't be sorry. I think all of us have cats. We're all cat people. So I just shout out to your cats. They had things to say about disability policy, it sounds like.
They're really, what it is that they're really accustomed to working on disability policy and being on my lap while we work on disability policy. And since I shut them out so rudely of the office and prevented them from walking across the screen, they have a lot to say about it.
Yeah, they'll make sure their voice is heard either way. So sorry to put that on the spot. I could hear them and I was like, sounds like my cats. So.
It'd probably increase our listeners and viewers on YouTube if we had more cats, honestly.
A little catficacy, something like that.
So I guess, Lillie, one of the things I'm curious about that we've kind of touched around, but from your perspective, because I can't remember how long you've been at AUCD and in part of this network, but what things, lessons from the network's response to all of these challenges we've talked about do you think will carry forward into the future, and what things have you taken from it in terms of learning about the network, those sorts of things?
Well, it's been a crash course. I think we would all consider me a seasoned vet. I've been here since March, so it's been forever. I think there's a lot for us to take away and learn from the last several months that hopefully empower us as a network to continue to grow and do better as it relates to policy and advocacy. I think that my colleague Liz says that all means all. And when she talks about it, she's generally talking about people with disabilities having a seat at the table, which yes. But I also think about it in terms of disability policy is an all of us issue. And if you work in disability, then you should care and pay attention to policy. It's really easy to not when things are stable and when funding is stable and when the government feels stable. But we have been in a moment of crisis for months that I think all of a sudden folks who hadn't paid attention to policy or maybe hadn't been engaging with policymakers had to play some catch up, and they had to learn, wait, what are appropriations? I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't know how to find a staffer and how to get a meeting. And those things I'm hoping that this is a good motivator for all of us to make this part of the regular practice of our work. Not just because we want more money or increased funding, but because what our network does is really incredible. I mean, you all do such important work, and it behooves you and it behooves policymakers for folks to know that, and for Congress to know, and your state policymakers to know what you do and how you're impacting communities and why you're indispensable. And we don't want to wait until a moment of crisis to try to start doing that. It's a lot harder and you're behind, instead of making that the regular practice that you have those relationships, and your policymakers, their staffers, your community, the people you serve, would vouch for you and can talk about the work you do and the impact you have. I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I'm really hoping moving forward we have. And I think the other one I would say is that there's been a really wonderful effort by our network to, when there's funding threats like this, there's a natural tendency to say, to go insular and say, oh, I need to protect my funding and I'm worried about me. And at a national level, we've made a really concerted effort to partner with other organizations and to work with and alongside independent living and with our DD Act partners who didn't experience the same type of funding threats that we did in this cycle. And a lot of the network was working really closely with their state DD council and their protection and advocacy agency and their chapter of the ARC and Autism Society and any number of other organizations. And that kind of partnership, I also think, is something that we can continue moving forward. And a lot of you have built those relationships and had those partners for years. But in these moments of crisis, when there is the funding feels like a finite resource and you want to protect what's yours, and instead of just focusing on us, I think there was a really good partnership that happened, and we saw really tremendous support from the broader disability kind of systems community to also speak up for our network, and that was invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
It was Sandy Root-Elledge, I think, in our very first kickoff of this series that said disability, all policy is disability policy. Let's see if I can actually say it. And so I just think that was really well said, Lillie. It's just the awareness that has happened across the network, but also all the other partners and organizations we work with on a daily basis, whether it's through the DD Act or through other community organizations, that there's a greater awareness around policy and just keeping it in mind. And so,
yeah, very well said. But so, Lillie, looking ahead to the next year, is it going to be as busy as this past year has been? And what are your hopes for our network, I guess?
If I could predict the future, I'd be a lot richer. I don't know what's going to come in the next year. The president's budget will come out probably in February. That's normally when it's supposed to happen, if it's on time. Who knows? And so will we see the same types of drastic cuts? Will they turn their attention elsewhere? Will there be pocket rescissions or just general rescissions packages where the administration tries to claw back funding that was passed on a bipartisan basis? I don't know. The part that gives me hope is that I think as a network, we are in a much better place than we were 6-8 months ago, and we are better equipped to protect the legacy of our work. I think a lot of folks have really stepped up to meet that moment, and it will be easier going forward to keep doing that than that initial shock and awe that we experienced in the last several months.
Yes, very well said.
I wanted to add something to what you said, Amelia, which is that the all policy being disability policy, I think is also really true and shows well in something I talk about when I meet with offices is the way that you all do meet state needs. And it's the fact that every USAD and London IDDRC, you all do things very, very differently. And that's because some folks are really focused on and have projects that are really focused on the early education space, and other people are looking at employment, and there's work on transportation, and there's work on accessible farming, and there's all of these different things. And it's because all policy is disability policy, and that's why you all work on such a broad range of issues, and your research is so different and your training is so different, is because disability impacts every single facet of life. You can't talk about housing or immigration or reproductive care or healthcare, or like you can't talk about anything without talking about people with disabilities and aging. And I mean, it's part of every facet of life. And I just think that's demonstrated really beautifully in the work that our network does.
Very cool. That's great. It's been so fun to hear from different USEDs in this series that we've done, and the things that they are focusing on, and how everyone has their niche, right? But then because we have the benefit of the network, we get to learn from one another. So someone else's transportation work in another state could inform transportation here in Missouri, right? And so that's the beauty of having the network, and also having AUCD, which helps convene those ideas, right? And convenes that cross collaboration and that sharing. So that's a huge asset for us, for all of us USEDs or other university centers, Lens and whatnot, is that we have you guys to kind of help pull that stuff together.
Well, Lillie, if someone wants to learn more about you, your work, or AUCD, where can they go to do that?
If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn. Name is Lillie Heigl. I'm sure it'll be in the description, but Lillie, last name Heigl. And if you're looking for my embroidery and needlework Instagram account, happy to share that as well. I don't think that's what you're asking for, but there's that to connect. And if you're looking for more information about AUCD, aucd.org, I'm really partial to the policy and advocacy tab. I would highly recommend going there. We have a number of wonderful policy resources. The two that I would like to quickly highlight: we write disability policy news on a weekly basis. It's a newsletter that comes out on Fridays that summarizes what's been going on in disability policy that week.
Those have been so helpful, Lillie. Just sorry I interjected, but those have been, and I've been forwarding them to partners who are like, I need to understand more. And I'm like, this is a great description. So well done.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. And we intentionally have plain language in there, and that's really important to us, is that newsletter be accessible to lots of different people. And then our wonderful senior advocacy specialist, Liz, does disability policy for all with Liz. It's kind of a revamped, shifted version of Tuesdays with Liz that she used to do. And she breaks down disability policy topics into plain language. She hosts interviews. We have a series that she has started. I don't know if it's out yet or not based on the date, but that we're kicking off, that this year is the 50th anniversary of IDEA. And so she's doing a series of videos about the different parts of IDEA and its legacy and what's to come. So those are a couple things that you can check out from AUCD's policy team, but there's definitely more there on the website if you're looking to do a little creeping on the policy and advocacy page.
Thank you so much, Lillie, for being here today and for the great information you gave us. Truly a pleasure to learn from you, and we hope that we'll have you back in the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Accessible. Accessible is hosted and produced by George Gatto, Amelia Reigard, and Catherine Toller from the University of Missouri, Kansas City Institute for Human Development, which is the home of the Missouri USED. Accessible is a joint project between the Missouri USED and the Missouri LEND program, which is funded by the Health Resources and Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services through grant number T73MC00022. Episodes of Accessible are released every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you subscribe to your podcasts. Join us next time to hear more insights and ideas from leaders in the disability world.